So as part of the Video Spotlight series, we are highlighting different modules on the continent. And today we're with Miss Orla Enright. She's a co-founder of the Green Exchange, a VC-backed green marketplace for debt and equity investments in emerging markets. She also has an experience as a founder, a previous founder, and works in the VC space as a partner at GOODsoil. Thank you for being here, Miss Enright.
No, thank you for your time, Esther. I'm excited for the conversation.
Amazing. So in this series, we're actually asking a lot of questions to people on the continent to really understand your expertise in the industry that you're in. And for the VC space in which you're in, in 2021, we saw a huge global VC growth, especially with Africa Tech. And Africa Tech businesses grew faster than any other region, with 2 times the activity of last year and more than 3 times the amount invested. This is truly impressive and the beginning of more to come. So what are the VCs like GOODsoil or VC-backed, the Green Exchange, doing in this landscape to provide access to capital for startups?
Yeah, sure. So there's definitely more of an appetite for investing into Africa. So we're seeing more limited partners. So limited partners are the investors in venture capital funds. So we're seeing them show more interest into the African tech scene. I think if you look back 3 to 4 years ago, you'd see a lot of venture capitalists saying Africa needs more exit, needs more unicorn valuations, more like Series B and above investments to prove there is an exceptional potential there to make returns. And I think it broke yesterday or the day before that Paystack has reached a $3 billion valuation, which is huge for the continent. It's the most valuable startup now in Africa. So I think there's more access to capital now. There's actually more VC funds popping up in Africa. I got introduced to one of theirs. Like, how have I not heard of this? It was like a pre-seed seed fund investing where we invest in Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya. When I say we, I mean at GOODsoil. Also, I think accelerators is a great way to provide more tools for capital. Accelerators are great because they give normally first-time founders introductions to investors that can help them in their follow-on rounds when they're raising it, like pre-seed after they've completed the accelerator. But yeah, there still needs to be more. I mean, if you look at how saturated the European ecosystem is for capital and venture capital and how competitive it is, I mean, there's still a long way to go for Africa when you look at the continent's mobile adoption rate, the size of the actual market. I mean, Nigeria's population is like another level. Yeah. So you need to take all of that into consideration, think how it's got the fastest growing middle class, fastest growing youth population. We're really just touching the surface with Africa. And I think it's going to be the people now who are investing in African tech who are really bullish, who are going to be the next generation of like billionaires, because it really is an untapped market still, I would say.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. But yeah, very insightful. And I think we're definitely at that inflection point of getting more funding. We still, as you mentioned, there's still more to be done, but I think we are on the right path. So thank you for sharing that. So specifically within the climate tech space, which you are very passionate about with Green Exchange and starting your own company through that, what is these spaces and what are VCs in these spaces doing to grow startups specifically in the climate tech space?
Yeah, I mean, climate tech is so interesting right now. So at the Green Exchange, what we do, we're a debt and equity marketplace. So investors can be both institutional funds and like individual investors like you and me, Esther, who just want to diversify their portfolio. They can invest in startups via a crowdfunding market. So the startups are all based on the continent in Africa, and they're all green businesses. So they have to have a green incentive to be part of the Green Exchange community and raise equity. And then on the other side, we have the green bond marketplace. So where we help very established companies in Africa issue their first green bond, their first corporate green bond. So we then connect them with institutional investors and we manage the whole process. So we really facilitate that corporate green bond investments in a hope to drive green bond issuances, in a hope to drive the amount of investments that's being made into the African continent. But more specifically to Africa, why it's good for climate changes. Africa is by far the most affected continent by global warming there's like a plethora of statistics that can back up my my statement. Yet again, unsurprisingly, it is the most isolated continent when it comes to financing. So we're seeing Joe Biden's administration now pledge $11.1 billion to developing countries. We're seeing lots of different world leaders stating that they recognize the problem happening with Africa and global warming and pledging their alliance effectively via capital to ensuring it's reversing global warming. But then there's other statistics as well. So green bond market is growing exponentially, yet Africa only makes, I think it's 0.3% of global green bond issuances. So people are seeing again the opportunity, like it doesn't make sense, like it's the most affected by climate change and it's getting no capital. Like green bonds is proving the most effective financing tool for companies to expand their green operations. Yet Africa's getting 0.2% of this, like it doesn't really make sense. So I think that's where there's hopefully we're going to see a drive into more investment into climate tech. And also COP27 is happening on the continent in Egypt in November the 8th till November the 20th this year. So what we're anticipating, myself and my co-founder Diana have been discussing this in depth, is that we're going to see the eyes of the world on Africa. I mean, we're going to see them looking at the continent, seeing how bad the issue of climate change is, expressing that this is the decisive decade, as everyone loves saying. And hopefully we're going to see a lot more pledges of capital of people supporting the continent in their effort to achieve net zero, which is insanely important for the next year. I hope we see a lot more clean electricity startups additionally. Air conditioning is a massive pollutant of climate. And if we look at countries like, well, I was just in Ghana, I just flew back literally 5 hours ago into London, and we live on air conditioning there. And I know if anybody's been to Dubai, I don't think that city could run without air conditioning. I think everyone would flee immediately. So we need more healthy alternatives, not healthy, cleaner alternatives to that. And also there's other opportunities there. I mean, in London, you can't really go more than a mile without seeing an electric charging vehicle pit stop for like Teslas or hybrids or BMW i8s. Yet in Ghana, I think I saw one in East Legon, which is like...
I'm actually surprised there's even one.
Yeah, I think someone built it into their house. It was in
that's East amazing. Legon,
which is like the nice part of Accra. But yeah, there's even opportunities like that. But when I'm in the ground in Accra, when we speak about it, my partner Diane, she's a Ghanaian, she lives in Accra full time. The Ghanaians, they recognise the issue. They're very passionate about solving it. So, I mean, all of the conversations we have regarding it have been super, super positive. So we just hope to continue on this upward trajectory with climate tech, and hopefully we see a lot more capital committed to fighting net zero in Africa and globally.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point. As you mentioned, the Biden administration is very passionate about developing change within the climate space and really accepting that there is something going on and trying to mitigate it as much as they can. And so I definitely think the time for climate tech and the growth of that is now, as you mentioned, and COP27 is definitely a very huge spotlight. So I'm hoping the eyes will be on Africa and the eyes will be on funding these enterprises doing great work on the continent.
Yeah.
Well, I have another question for you around risk, because the perception of risk on the continent is something that a lot of investors, usually when you mention Africa, at least in the past, they used to say, well, it's a bit too risky, so it's not a region that I want to focus on. Do you think it's a very exaggerated concept at this time, or do you think it's still a fair assessment, given that, even in the recent pandemic, a lot of countries got downgraded through the pandemic by the credit ratings to really almost augment that perception of risk on the continent. So do you think it's still a fair assessment, or do you think it's something that can be diversified away?
In terms of venture capital, I think the risk has always been that it hasn't been done enough. Venture capital, I think, so when venture capitalists invest, it's like a famous thesis, that is, they invest in familiarities. They always invest through their network, and it creates this kind of concept of an old boys network. And I think familiarity is just a basic form of de-risking. You're more likely to invest in someone you're like best friend from school, went to university with or worked with, because of the trust factor there. But with Africa, a lot of European investors had never really invested at pre-seed in like Ghana, Nigeria, or Kenya. And there's also these issues around the governance of it, how politically safe was it, economically, it was a little bit turbulent in some parts of Africa. So I think this all added to the risk. And I think the market could be seen as a little bit opaque if you're not on the ground in like Accra or Nairobi or Lagos or anywhere else. Because it's not publicized enough, really. You get the YC demo days and it's shot up around the VC world and you're not able to move without seeing a pitch from the day, whereas we don't really get that with Africa. I don't know if it's because there's that lack of public interest or just lack of media attention. But yeah, I think as time goes on, though, we're seeing far more people investing in Africa, and this idea of it being very risky is actually a little bit ridiculous when you think about it, because of the size of the continent. Having a continent that large with that many people and that many tech startups growing out of it to ever be deemed as risky. I think the main thing was probably the political turbulence, especially in Nigeria. I heard horror stories about people flying into Lagos Airport when they were beginning their VC journeys. So yeah, Accra is obviously it's a lovely place to fly into, so I can't take that sentiment. But I think it's getting a lot better now. Most definitely, the risk isn't seen to be as large, and we're seeing great investments like Paystack, $3 billion valuation. Yeah, more of that, please, and I think the risk will be totally eradicated.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something that I want to unpack a bit, given that you're a woman in the VC space, and we do know that women VC funds that are women-led are very, very few, especially even in the US. So it's not something that is unique to Africa, it's unique to across the world. What do you think about what can be done to change that, to bring more women in this space? Because you're right, it's very relationship and network driven, and that actually reduces the amount of funding that also goes to women entrepreneurs, given that some VC funds are definitely not gender mixed or don't have women representing fund managers making these investments. What are your thoughts on that?
So what are my thoughts on why there's not many female VCs in Africa?
Yeah, and also, what are some of the things you're seeing that are being done to change a bit of that? But as you know, it's a problem everywhere.
Yeah, why there's not enough VCs? Good question. I really think it's hard to answer. I think it's very person by person. So at GOODsoil, Charmaine Hayden's our founding partner, who's extremely bullish, charismatic. I don't think there's anyone she couldn't charm into investing into. So she's like a perfect venture capitalist in that respect. She's got an excellent eye for a deal, and she's aggressive in growing our portfolio of founders. Why there's not more women in VC? I think it's a really hard question to answer. I know it's one of the most popular questions to ask regarding VC. I think the barriers to entry may be a little bit high for women. It's a competitive field. Like when you find a deal, especially if you're investing in like Series A, it's really cutthroat and competitive.
Gotcha.
Make sure you ensure that deal. Yeah, maybe it's been an old boys club. Maybe they feel more comfortable hiring old boys, like men who went to their old schools. To be honest, I really don't think there's a clear-cut answer for it. They've always been my kind of thoughts around it.
Right.
How we can get more women into VC, I think more role models. So there's a great COO at Piggy Bank based in Nigeria, and she's opened a fund called First Check Africa.
Yes,
and they invest in female founders at pre-seed. I think the ticket size is like up to $150,000. More of that is going to increase the appetite of females wanting to break into venture capital. I think it's still seen as a little bit of an aspirational field to get into, but I really don't think it should be. It's a job you learn a lot in. We're constantly learning every day. When I was at GOODsoil, I'm now full-time at the Green Exchange, I should add. but constantly learning every day. The founders can teach you sometimes far more than you can ever teach them about what they're building.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe more entry-level positions that are specifically catered for women, internship levels. Maybe we can set something up where we mentor girls like finishing university or college, as you say, in the US, wanting to break into US. Yeah, I think I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to it. I just think the more representation that we have in VC for women, then the better it's going to be. It's going to be seen as a more accessible field to enter.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think when you see people in the field, you're inspired to think that you can also be in the field. So I think you're right. Maybe more representation through, I love the idea of internships or a pathway to break into venture, not through, of course, the old boys club, etc. But I think that's a very good point. So thanks for sharing that. So talking about, VC and, after making your investments, what are your thoughts on what exits look like on the continent? What has been your experience so far?
That's a really good question. So I touched on it earlier. I was at a Google immersion event in London. I think it was before the pandemic, like 4 years ago. It was hosted by Marsha Krupinska, who's really quite great on Africa. She's really pushed a lot of resources towards it. But I remember a Nigerian VC was saying it's going to be exits driven. And I think the next 2-3 years we're going to see a lot more exits. Because I was speaking to one of our co-founders, one of our portfolio founders, sorry, is a guy called Julian. He's the CEO of Zeepay, which is like a really, really innovative product based out in Ghana. It's going to completely revolutionize how people are paid out there. And the product is the A1. It's really exceptional. And he collects so much data on the user. I was like, what we think is going to happen, say 2-3 years time, there's going to be one of these huge Silicon Valley companies that have got $1 billion to spare. They're going to want to move into the African continent because it makes sense. The market size is there. All of these other stats I was listing earlier, like fastest growing middle class, fastest growing youth population, they're going to want to know what makes the typical African consumer tick. What's their buying history? What's their buying? What's the word I'm looking for? Habits. So he's going to have all that data on them. Like, they're going to be a fool not to buy them. They're going to want to see all the data. They're going to see what's going to happen. So companies like that, I love the thought process behind, because it's thinking into the future. It's thinking, somebody's going to want to buy, and they're going to want to find out everything about the local African buyer. So I think it's a great example. But we're going to see, but there's no doubt we're going to see all of these big companies buy into the African tech space in the next 3 to 4 years. They're going to need to if they want to stay relevant. Look at what we saw with Afrobeats in the last 2-3 years. I mean, Burna Boy's everywhere now. So hopefully the trend follows with VC and startups.
Yeah, definitely. What a good point. Thank you for sharing that. And then my last question for you today is, for new investors to the continent, aspiring VC investors, or just maybe angel investors, what are some of the mistakes you've often seen them do when implementing their investment strategy?
Mistakes I've seen made. I've made a good few, but we learn from them. We should really not fear mistakes. They're the best learning tool. The seed rounds are a lot different. I know I saw a statistic the other day, but I always think a pre-seed round in London is not the same as a pre-seed round in Ghana. The capital goes a lot further in Ghana, for example. I think the statistic is 1 to 7. So a really highly trained employee you can hire in London, you can get 7 in Ghana. So think of that. If you're raising $150,000 in London, how far is that going to get you? In comparison to Ghana, that's like 18 months of runway and a team and an office.
Yeah.
So it's insanely different there. Mistakes made in the context, I think you do need to spend time on the ground, see the culture, see how it ticks, see the buying behaviors of the consumers that you're targeting, get close and personal with your founders if you want to invest into them, see the product that they're building, meet their team. I think that's key. And I think building a relationship where your founder and you have a relationship where there's no judgment, they don't feel like we're the teacher like getting angry with them for not doing their homework, but it needs to be completely equal. They need to feel comfortable coming to us about everything and anything, because if they don't and there's a problem, that problem could roll over and get quite catastrophic, whereas we can help them and work through it immediately. So we're really eager to create that like level playing field, and I'm sure all of our fans would agree we do that really well. I mean, I go out for dinner with our founders as soon as I touch down in Accra just to catch up, and I'm good friends with their partners. So I think it's important building that relationship, moving when you're doing VC in general, but especially in Africa.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I love the fact that, you know, your founders and your portfolio companies are not people who you maybe teach, your partners. You guys are partnering up together. 100%. So
they're exceptionally talented. So they can most likely teach me far more than I can ever teach them. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Ms. Enright, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on VC on the continent. I will stop the recording now.